Good day, learners. In today's lesson, we're going to look at a very important moment in South Africa's history. This was a time when our country moved from the apartheid system to democracy. Now I want you to imagine standing in a very long line with people of different races, different ages, waiting for something that you've never been allowed to do ever in your life. The following picture shows elections in 1994. So, for the very first time, people in South Africa were allowed to vote in a fair and free election. So, I want you to ask yourself, why do you think this day was so special, and why was it too or very important to South Africans? In this lesson, we will explore how leaders came together at CODESA, the challenges they faced, and how their negotiations finally led to democratic elections. So, learners, by the end of this lesson, you will understand why this moment was not just about casting a vote, but about building peace, freedom, and active citizenship in South Africa.
CODESA stands for the Convention for a Democratic South Africa. It was a series of negotiations held in the early 90s between the apartheid government, the African National Congress, other political parties and organizations. The purpose of CODESA was to discuss and plan transition from apartheid to a democratic system where all South Africans, regardless of their race, would have the right to vote and to participate in government. There were two main gatherings, CODESA 1 in 1991, which brought together different political parties to start the negotiations, and then there were CODESA 2, which continued the negotiations, but then there were disagreements, especially on how power would be shared in the new government. Even though CODESA did not solve everything, it was very important because it laid the groundwork, which eventually led South Africa to its first democratic elections in 1994. Leaders that helped South Africa become a democratic country, we have Nelson Mandela, leader of the ANC, African National Congress. He fought against apartheid and spent 27 years in prison. He became South Africa's first democratic president in 1994, worked to calm tensions, prevent violence, and keep negotiations alive when they were broken down. And then we have F.W. de Klerk from the National Party. He was the last president of South Africa under the apartheid system. He released Nelson Mandela in 1990. He helped start CODESA talks and end apartheid. He unbanned political movements that were fighting against the apartheid system.
Okay, Lena, so now we are going to talk about our next leader, who is Desmond Tutu. As you can see from the picture, Desmond Tutu was a church leader who was known for being a moral and a spiritual leader. He spoke out very strongly against apartheid. He promoted non-violence and he encouraged reconciliation, because later during 1994, he chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, which was TRC, that was going to help heal the nation after apartheid. And then moving on, we're going to talk about Oliver Tambo. Oliver Tambo was the leader of the African National Congress, known as the ANC. He lived outside South Africa during apartheid because during that time, the government would not allow him to stay in the country. So during that time, Tambo would travel around the world to different places to get support against apartheid. He pleaded with other countries to put pressure on the apartheid government by using sanctions. And when we talk about sanctions, we are talking about stopping trade and businesses with South Africa. He also kept the struggle for freedom alive while Nelson Mandela and the other leaders were in prison. So that sums up everything that we need to know about the leaders, the key leaders who played a role into democracy. So now we are going to move on to the challenges that came about democracy, because the way to democracy was not a smooth sailing road. There were challenges along the way. So with the first challenge, we're going to look at the disagreements about power sharing. So during that time, the ANC wanted a full democracy where every South African adult was allowed to vote. But differently, the National Party wanted a power sharing system that would give them strong influence over their country even after apartheid ended. So, this clash of ideas caused delays and arguments during the negotiations. So now we move on to the second challenge, which was violence and political tension. So while leaders were meeting at CODESA, violence continued in many communities due to the prolonged negotiations. So there were clashes between the political groups like the ANC and the Inkatha Freedom Party, which is known as the IFP. So this whole thing made it harder to build peace in the country, and it slowed down negotiations. So now moving on to the last challenge that they were facing, we see that there were too many parties and too many interests. As you can see, CODESA had representatives from many different political groups. Each group wanted to protect its own interest, which made coming to an agreement very difficult. So sometimes smaller parties they would walk out of talks, adding to the tension, which resulted into negotiations taking longer than expected. So all these are the challenges that came about South Africa reaching or getting to democracy. So now to make sure that everyone understood, I'm going to ask you guys a few questions.
Okay, my learners, so now we're going to reflect on our lesson and then we're going to discuss some of the points that we have learned today, right? So my first question to you is, what is CODESA? Okay, very good. So firstly, we need to know that CODESA stands for Convention for a Democratic South Africa, ne? So it was a series of important meetings held in the early 1990s where different political groups and organizations came together to discuss South Africa's future after apartheid. Very good. So tell me now, why was it important for South Africa's democracy? Okay. So it was important because it created the path for South Africa to become a democracy, right? At these talks, remember, the leaders agreed to end apartheid. They also wrote a new constitution and allowed all citizens, meaning black, white, Indian, and colored, the right to vote, the equal right to vote, right? Very good. So, who are the leaders that were involved? So, yes, and remember, those leaders are from the smaller political parties and community organizations, right? So, we are talking about, you're correct, Nelson Mandela from the ANC. We are talking about F.W. de Klerk from the National Party, and then we are talking about the Mangosuthu Buthelezi from the IFP. Thank you. And then the importance of CODESA in 1994 elections in shaping South Africa. How did the CODESA in the 1994 shape South Africa? Okay. So that is true. CODESA was the first step in bringing people together on a peaceful end to apartheid, right? These negotiations led to the 1994 democratic elections where South Africans of all races could vote for the very first time. This marked the beginning of a new democratic SA based on equality, freedom, and human rights. Now that we have reflected on our lesson, I just want to give you guys homework so that I can see that you guys truly understand, because you know that sometimes you can just say yes knowing that you don't understand at all. So just take out your books and then I'm going to explain the homework to you.
Class, your homework is going to be a very colorful poster showing 5 key events that led to the 1994 first democratic election in South Africa. So basically, what is a timeline? A timeline is a straight line that covers what? That covers events or a sequence of events starting from the oldest to the most recent. Most recent being what? Being the 1994 election, you know. So how are you going to structure it? So basically, just gonna create a very colorful poster. You can use your coloring pencils. You're gonna use everything to color it. So you're gonna show what? You're gonna show it's gonna be a picture, and then you're gonna write the event. Let's take two events for example. We have the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, and then we have Soweto uprising in 1976. So which event are we going to cover first? Obviously, it's gonna be the 1960 because it's the oldest. Yeah? Comes what? Comes the Soweto uprising. You know what I'm saying? You're gonna write a statement supporting or linking it to the most recent event being the 1994 elections. How it led to the 1994 elections. 1 or 2 lines. Yeah? When do I want it? I want it on Friday. I want it on Friday. It must be colorful. You don't have to add too much information, but at the same time, it must be informative. It must have pictures to show evidence of the events. Are we good? Any other questions? Or sources where you're going to find information in your textbook. I guess we already covered some of the events. Yes, we covered some of the events in your textbook. You're more than welcome to also use the internet. Are we good? No questions?